The difference is, Mary never stops looking. She always keeps her eyes on the face of her Son. And she always sees in that face the promise that that angel made. That this is God. And that God will bring life even out of death. And so Father Stephen talks about the liturgy of the living dead as an experience. You know what? I think it's a great one. Because we sing on Pascha, by death Christ trampled death. If we're going through some dying in our personal lives, it's not a bad thing. If we're going through some dying in the life of our parish, in the life of our church, it's not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if we lose hope and we despair and we give in to that. If the sufferings and the aches and the pains and the loneliness and the fears and the doubts and the anxieties become more important than Christ. They're there, and we're not asked to pretend that they aren't. But we're always asked to see Christ in those realities. Because when we see Christ in those realities, He transforms those realities. If we are going to be a church alive in hope, if we're going to be a people alive in hope, we have to know what hope looks like, and that hope is Christ. And if we're really going to live in that, we need to ask some questions about ourselves. How are we living? A lot of times we say to young people, you're our hope. You're the hope for our church. I hear that a lot when I do a lot of work with young people. In addition to working in the Office of Evangelization, I work with the Office of Youth Ministry. And people will say, oh, the young people, you work with the young people, that's so wonderful. They're our hope. No, they're not. They're not. That's an unfair burden and an unrealistic burden to place on their shoulders. They are not our hope. And most of the time when we say that, what we mean is either, A, you're cute and have a nice smile, and you're young, so I'd like to have you around. Or B, you're going to keep the lights on and the heat on so that I can be buried from my church. Hollywood is the place for smiling faces. Bank accounts are the place for money. I do believe that our young people can be our hope. But I believe that if young people are going to be our hope, we need to know what that hope is. And the only way they're going to be hope is if they have a relationship with Jesus Christ, because He is our hope, and the only way they're going to have that relationship is if they see it modeled in you. One of my favorite people growing up as a kid in my home parish was a guy named Michael Durkot. Michael died at the age of 102. And if you asked me when I was a little boy, why do you like Mr. Durkot so much? I would tell you it was because every Sunday when I saw him, he gave me $1. But the fact, the fact that if it was feast days, it was more than that. Sometimes $5 a feast. And he did. But I remember when Mike was dying, and it happened that he was in the same hospital as my mother, a couple floors down. And I would go during the day. I actually left seminary and went home to be with my mom. And during the day, I would stay there and sit with Mom until Dad came home from work. Then Dad in the evening would come and spend the night with Mom, and then I would come back in the morning so we could go to work. And when I found out Mike was in the hospital, when I would leave Mom, I would go downstairs to see Mike for a little bit. And I went down and I would see him, and we'd talk and we'd pray together and share stories. And then one day I came in, and he had this big arrangement of roses. It must have been 2 or 3 dozen, these big, beautiful red roses in this decorative vase, and it was sitting on that little ledge there on the side of the room. And, hospital rooms are, for the most part, not too exciting or very interesting. And so when you get something like that, it's nice. And so Mike was saying how happy he was to have these roses, and they're so beautiful, and he likes the smell of them, and he likes to look at them, and he's so happy that they were sent because everything here is so boring. And I said, well, that's nice. So we talked again, as we usually do. And the next day, I came back. And when I came back, I went in the room, and Mr. Durkot was there, and he was sleeping. And so I didn't wake him because when you're in the hospital, you can't really sleep well because people are coming and poking you and prodding you, and machines are running and things like that. So when you're able to get sleep, it's good to sleep. So I let him sleep, and I was saying a prayer. And while I was saying a prayer, he woke up, and I mentioned, I said, Mr. Durkot, your flowers are gone. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I went to sleep and I woke up and they were gone. Somebody stole your flowers. What kind of person goes into the room of a dying man in the hospital and steals the only thing in the room that the guy has to make him happy? I said, Mr. Jerkott, I said, that's terrible. I said, they stole your flowers. You loved those flowers so much, and they were the only thing that you had. Somebody came in here and stole them while you were sleeping. I can't believe that. That's terrible. And then he kind of sighed. Well, maybe somebody needed them to make them happy. And if they needed them to make them happy, I'm glad they took those flowers. I was blown away. Not only was this man not angry about that, but he actually could say, someone needed them, and if they needed them, I'm glad that they took them. Not only am I not angry, I'm glad. The only thing that the man had to make him happy, the only thing he had to make him smile, the only bright spot in the room was this vase of flowers. And when it was stolen, the man didn't get upset, he didn't get irritated, he said, I'm happy. I'm glad that they took them. And that's why I loved Mike so much as a kid. Because what made Mike happy in the room was not the flowers. What made Mike happy was Mike's relationship with Christ. And it was because of that relationship that he was able to say, even in that moment as he lay there dying in that bed, I'm glad that somebody took those flowers from me. Not it's okay, I'm actually glad. Michael knew Jesus Christ. Michael loved Jesus Christ. Michael had an actual honest-to-goodness relationship with this person who he loved so much that these other things didn't matter. Because he had the only thing that mattered. He had a person who was his God, who was with him. And that made all the difference for him. And that was the reason why, in retrospect, I loved that man so much as a kid. Because I saw the way that man came to church, and I saw the way that man prayed, and I saw the way that man loved his wife, and I saw the way that man loved us, and I saw the way that man lived, and I saw the way that man died. That man showed me and all of the rest of us in that parish hope. Because he showed us what it really looks like to live in a relationship with God. And so, yeah, our young people, they can be the hope for our church. But you and I also are called to be the hope for our church. Not because of anything the young people are doing, or not because of anything we're doing, but because of who we're in a relationship with. We're called to be in that relationship with Christ. We're called to have Him as our hope. We're called to see Him in the midst of our sufferings and in the midst of our joys. It's easy to see God when things are going well and we're happy and we're excited. Oh yeah, thank God. It's a lot more difficult to see God in those times when we're being engaged in struggle. But God is there. That's why Mary was able to stand at the foot of the cross and look and see in that face hope. And you and I are called to do the same. We're called to be witnesses. Witnesses to who Christ is in our lives. And witnesses to the fact that that makes a difference in our lives as individuals and in our lives as church. The answer to the problems that we face as a community of faith cannot be solved by programs. They cannot be solved by ideas. They cannot be solved by mission statements. They cannot be solved by activities. All of those things help. But those things only help if Christ is at the center of them all. And that those things then point back to Him. They flow from Him, and they lead people back to Him. And that's what makes the difference.